Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And just want to start off, as I sometimes do, by thanking our loyal viewers and commenters. Asked for some help with what to do with the international free agent signing period that's beginning today, as well as thoughts on what to do with a potential trade of our injured possible ace, Mason Miller, and got many responses to our last couple episodes on those topics from many of you, and I do sincerely appreciate the thoughts. We're going to go through them right now. I don't think we're going to do a whole bunch this episode, and I don't know if it's going to be the longest episode ever. I know that sometimes I say that and then 50 minutes later I'm still talking. Hopefully that won't happen today. But I want to at least figure out a plan for international amateur free agency and then talk through the Mason Miller situation and some of the ideas that have been shared with me on that front. And we've been thinking about trading Mason Miller for a while. He ruptured his UCL in spring training last year, and then late this past season in 2025, he suffered a setback, so he's still 5 months away from being able to throw. He's going to miss spring training. In a perfect world, maybe he'll begin a rehab assignment in May. He's now making more than the major league minimum, even though he hasn't pitched in the majors in over a year at this point. Still think he's got a very interesting profile. The question is what he's going to look like after a ruptured UCL with complications. I think it's fair to assume he's going to be fragile, and it's possible that he may have lost some velocity or he may not have the same arsenal that he had before. But it's possible that he looks exactly like we think he is right now coming out of this injury as well. And if that's the case, he's still a pretty valuable player. We've been looking at trade options for him for well over a season at this point, and honestly, some of the options that we could have gotten for him over a year ago before he was hurt and before he was making more than the major league minimum and before he was older are better than what we can get for him today. I'm going to take a look at about 5 players, though, that have shown up when we've shopped him recently and or not so far away. We can't get any of these players straight up for Miller, but they're all players that I've considered trading him for, and I know some of you have some pretty strong thoughts on these players as well. And the first is Jesus Lizama. YME943 reminded me of him after I asked the question in a previous episode because I couldn't recall who he was. 17-year-old who's already played a season in rookie ball for the Seattle organization. Second baseman, looks like he could have a very good bat and be a interesting defensive player, can play a lot of places in the infield, can play in the corner outfield, so he can probably play anywhere except catcher or center field. I don't think he's great anywhere. He's probably a natural second baseman, first baseman, or third baseman. But the bat is certainly interesting. But again, we'd have to be adding more talent in addition to Mason Miller to bring Lizama on board. I do like the fact that he's another very young, talented player with a lot of upside that we'd be able to add into our organization, though. A guy who we can still get in a package, including Miller, is Matt Shaw. Jeansy brought up Shaw. A couple things I really like about him. I like his bat, and I like his blistering speed. What I don't like about him is the low work ethic and the likelihood that he's going to strike out a ridiculous amount of times. Was not good in his introduction to the majors this past year with the Cubs. And at 24 years old, He's perhaps not as young as we'd ideally like to get in a trade for Miller. He is the number 39 prospect in baseball, but when we try to trade for him, and I guess I probably should have went through this with Lizama as well, we have to add in a pretty useful-ish player. Although, the price for him is less than a lot of these other guys that we're talking about. We can basically get him for Miller and someone who's essentially worthless with some of those 2-star, 1.5-star potential guys. I'm sure we can find one we don't really like there, but I don't love the strikeouts, and I don't love the low work ethic, and I don't love that he's really not great anywhere defensively. So I think I'd rather keep Miller and hope that he comes back looking close to what he was rather than take a risk on Shaw. And back to Lizama, since we're talking about it, he didn't show up anymore because similar to, I think it was Skeens, the Mariners just have no money right now. Presumably they've got some free agent offers out and they don't have money to spend. So we'd have to throw in cash in addition to Miller. And then we still need to add Butler, who we just signed to what we think could be a really nice medium-term contract, or Cameron Cawley, who we think has potential to maybe eventually take over as our second baseman for us. He's really made a lot of improvements since we picked him up. He's in the development lab now, and he's progressed to be the number 55 prospect in baseball. So as intrigued as I am with Lizama, I don't think I make that deal either. Chase DeLauder is a guy who's liked by both Stanley Rosella and Don't Worry, I Know Where You Live. Some things I really like about him: really good contact hitter, decent power, decent eye, and I love the gap power in a vacuum. The issue is his speed is not that great, so I don't think he's going to take advantage of Oakland's dimensions with that gap power as much as somebody with more speed. He's only a competent-ish defensive outfielder. He's been a bit below average in the majors over the course of his career. And he's more similar in terms of what it would take to Matt Shaw, where it's basically just Miller, and then we can throw in someone that we don't care about all that much to get it done. But I just don't know, with the fact that the speed kind of cancels out the usefulness of that gap power, how big an improvement Chase DeLauder is. Now, particularly against right-handed batters, he's really good at making contact and hitting the ball, which is something that our team has definitely struggled with. But Miller's potential still intrigues me. Nelvi Marte was a popular selection of many of our scouts. Don't Worry, I Know Where You Live, Bald Sherlock, and Horticulture Vulture all had positive things to say about potentially bringing him on board. I like his bat. I like his glove. I like-ish his speed. I like a lot of things about him, but I'm not in love with him. And to bring him on board, we got to give them Miller and a pretty good prospect or a pretty good player. So he's got the second highest price tag of these guys that we've looked at this point. The reason why I think I'm trending against Nelvi Marte is that we've got a lot of guys right now who are kind of competing to be a second or third baseman for us, depending on what we do with O'Neill Cruz, Addison Barger, Brian Rincon, Tyler Brack, Trey Cruz, Austin Gauthier, Daryl Hernandez. Likely only two of those guys are going to make our major league roster. And when I look at Hernandez in his profile is pretty similar to Marte's, and he kind of stunk for us last year. I'm still hopeful he's going to get better. He's in the development lab right now, but I just don't see where Marte's profile is all that different than what we already have on board with Mr. Hernandez. And last but not least is Paul Skeens, Horticulture Vulture, Stanley Rosella, Bald Sherlock, all thought he might be a direction to consider. Not My Four-Ply was a little more cautious about him. We like some things about him, like that he's a ground ball pitcher that throws in the triple digits, incredible fastball, excellent slider, and a potentially above average changeup. Only a 3-pitch guy, but a 3-pitch arsenal that I think can certainly play as a starter. He's got good stamina, and he looks really good with that potential 65 stuff, but we have to keep in mind that 65 stuff is as a closer. And when we set his position as a starter, which is where we'd likely be using him, he's 55 stuff, 55 movement, 50 control. A good solid major league pitcher, but is he any better than Clark Schmidt? I don't know that he is. I mean, Skeens is a huge name, but you look at this profile and you look at what he's done now over his 2 years in the majors, and he's been, by the numbers, a below average pitcher both years in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus. Not horrible, and we still think there's potential for him to get better. He's another guy who doesn't seem to be showing up in the offers when we shopped Mason Miller, I think simply because of Pittsburgh's financial situation also. But if we add in Miller and then the money to kind of get them back to whole as far as their budget, we still have to add in a pretty good player to get the deal done. And when I think to myself that Skeens is a starter, when I'm objective about it, and I look at his ratings, and I even look like what he's done his first 2 years in the majors, although he's a huge name, and he's not going to be 24 until May, he's kind of Clark Schmidt. Not that there's anything wrong with Clark Schmidt. I love having Clark Schmidt on our team. He's our best pitcher. He was our all-star last year. But do I give up Mason Miller and another pretty important young player or prospect in our organization to bring on another Clark Schmidt? And I just don't think I do right now. I don't think I do any of these trades right now. And if Miller ends up suffering another setback, if Miller ends up coming back a shell of what we think he is right now, I'm probably going to be kicking myself. But looking at what I have to give up for any of these 5 players, I don't feel like I want to do that quite yet. We've still got another 3.5 months till the season begins. There's time for me to revisit this. Couple other interesting ideas. Paul West just said we need to trade Miller, so I'm probably disappointing him by not doing anything right now. In NS1, CLRK brought up a real interesting idea of trying to trade Miller for some international amateur free agent dollars. I did investigate that, not just with Miller, but with some other guys, and the price for those dollars is, in my mind, pretty exorbitant right now. But I think that's something as we kind of move through the coming days and weeks that I'll continue to check in on, because it is a very interesting IAFA class. We do have the benefit of being tied for the largest budget of anyone out there at 5.7 million. But right now, the price to pick up some additional money is a little high. But if we get into a situation where we think we can pick up a second big time prospect, if we bring a couple $100,000 more money on board, you can certainly bet on the fact that I'll be back in the trade market trying to find that money. And Paul West also mentioned that he thought we should try to upgrade at catcher, and I can't disagree with him. We felt that the duo of Langoliers and Banfield might be able to provide some offense, and it just hasn't happened over the last 2 seasons for Langoliers and over the last season for Banfield. I like those guys defensively, but we've got to start getting some type of production out of our offense, and I think potentially upgrading at catcher in terms of a bat is the way to do that. Unfortunately, there's no real stars on the market at this point. I've also perused the trade market, and the price for anyone who would be, I don't even want to say a major impact player, but anyone who would be a clear upgrade over what we currently have is pretty ridiculous. But I'm intrigued by Tyler Stevenson, and this is a familiar name to those of you who watched our Seattle miniseries, because we ended up with him there. But I feel like he could at least be a useful bat at catcher for us against left-handed pitching, while not being a disaster defensively. We've only got average scouting accuracy on him, so I'm going to request an updated scouting report. But if he is still on the market when we get that scouting report back and kind of looks like we think he looks, might be someone to consider. Travis d'Arnaud is also borderline interesting to me, but I don't love him defensively. I don't love his fragility. I don't love that he's going to be 37 before the season begins. So I'm going to continue spending some time looking for someone who I think could help us at the position, whether in free agency or the trade market. Reese McGuire is another guy who's borderline interesting. I like the defense. I like the captain personality. We could use that. The bat, other than the total lack of home run power, is okay. And he is a left-handed hitter who's a little better against right-handed pitching, so that might be an opportunity for us to use him versus righties in a platoon, and then have Banfield or Langoliers as the other guy in the mix. So I'm a little more intrigued by Reese McGuire than I thought I would be. I don't love him. He's got a 78 WRC plus over the course of his career, and he's been lower that the last 2 years as he's turned 30. But when I look at our catchers, Banfield's got a 48 WRC plus over the course of his relatively brief career. But Langoliers is at 77, so I just don't know if McGuire is really even an upgrade at this point. Does give us the opportunity to platoon, so that's interesting. But I think I'm going to wait and get the report back on Stevenson, and if McGuire happens to be off the market by then, that's my fault for not acting right now. I just don't think he's going to be a difference maker. He still may be an upgrade, and it might make sense to bring him on board, but I don't think the difference between getting Maguire or getting Stevenson is going to ultimately result in one more win or one more loss for this team over the course of the season. So as I waffle on what to do at catcher, and I waffle on what to do with Mason Miller, I've got to actually do something in this episode, and international amateur free agency is going to be where we do make some decisions. And similar to the thoughts on Miller, we got a ton of interesting thoughts on what we should do with this IAFA class. So the initial plan that I outlined at the end of the last episode was to perhaps try to land both shortstop David Orta. Love the bat, especially the power for a middle infielder, and a pretty interesting glove. As I said last episode, I think he's really a third baseman when all is said and done, but with that 60 contact, 85 power, and a potentially plus gap power and eye, he certainly is the bat to be a third baseman. I don't love the greed and the lack of intelligence, but he's still a pretty interesting prospect to me. And I thought that could also make a run at Jorge Montez, who's a pretty clean prospect. Good range, good speed, high work ethic and adaptability, plus contact, plus gap power, plus power. Not going to draw a ton of walks, but not going to be a total disaster there either. And we could bid with the $5.7 million we have a little bit over on both of those players and try to make a run at both of them. Was not a popular plan with our scouting department. Paul West, thank you, Paul, did say he was okay with the plan. And Jarek Braxton just suggested that we needed to get a 5-star prospect, which I guess Orta technically qualifies as. But there were other players who were much more popular with our worldwide scouting department. And the most popular player is the second baseman Bertrand Albrighton out of Aruba. And wasn't quite unanimous, but Horticulture Vulture, Sean Gratton, Bald Sherlock, Not My Four-Ply, DLL First Baseman 14 all liked him. And I can understand why. He's an incredible hitting prospect, and he's got an incredible personality. My reticence on him is the lack of a position you're really going to like to play him at in the infield, even at 6 feet tall. He'd certainly play fine at first base, but is not optimal. And I'm most concerned about his fragility, and that was something that both Jeansy and IndieBab brought up and agreed with me on, that the fragility would cause them a little bit of concern about potentially going after the Dominator. But the potential for that bat and the fact that with the high leadership, loyalty, adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence, and the coaching we have throughout our organization, and the investment we make in player development, the chance of success with his bat developing is pretty much as good as it can possibly be. And those encouraging us to go after Bertrand have also suggested, hey, we've got the development lab now. We can get him in there, and we can turn him into, to use a very dated reference, the $6 million man, and strengthen him and make him better and replace his parts and turn him into someone who's not so fragile. And certainly, if we did bring him on board, that would be something that I would think about and strongly consider. And the third 5-star hitting prospect is someone we haven't talked about, Juan Canyo. Indiba, Jeansy, not my 4-ply, all like him. Pretty clean prospect. You'd prefer to have not low leadership and low loyalty, but still has high adaptability, high work ethic. Looks like a very interesting bat. Can definitely play a competent corner, outfield, or left field. Left-handed hitter, only 16 years old, from Venezuela. And he's looking for the least money of any of the 5-star prospects. So he's an interesting one as well. And then the last guy who was mentioned by the scouting department was Jorge Montez by DLL First Base 14. And another very clean prospect. Good speed, nice range in the outfield, high adaptability and work ethic, and a bat that looks like it could be very productive as well. And as we've talked about, Montez was part of my original plan along with Mr. Orta. So the suggestion has been made, hey, stick with Montez, and Bertrand Albrighton is looking for less money than Orta. So just pivot from the shortstop to the second baseman, and he can make a run at both of those guys. And I think pairing Montez with either the Dominator or the Matador is what I am going to do. When we compare the batting ratings, you have to favor the Dominator. The Matador's got a very interesting bat, but the only category that he's better than the Dominator in is his potential home run power. So to me, that favors the Dominator. But defensively, things get a little more tricky because every defensive category favors the Matador, David Orta. And you can see he can potentially play a lot of defensive positions for you pretty competently. Not that we're going to probably make a decision like this based purely on bunting and speed and stealing ability, especially because neither of these guys is particularly proficient at any of those tasks. But it favors the Matador a little bit, in my opinion. So then it comes down to some of the other things. I love the personality of Albrighton, but the fragility scares me. Orta is normal in terms of his injury proneness, but the personality just doesn't match up to Bertrand. And there's certainly a greater risk with Orta that he's not going to reach his full potential than there is because Albrighton has such a fantastic personality. And I'm really torn. I've gone back and forth all day on this in my mind as I've seen some of the comments and suggestions coming in, and I've gone back and forth about 5 times on this in my mind since I paused the episode to think about what I was going to do with this decision. I really like Orta's defense. I think if he fully develops, he could be a all-star third baseman. If he fully develops, he could be a Hall of Fame third baseman who would probably win some Gold Gloves and a load of Silver Sluggers. But I have a worldwide scouting department for a reason. And as much as the fragility of Albrighton scares me, I love the personality. And I think he's ultimately going to end up at first base or DH, where hopefully the wear and tear on him will be a little bit less. And we do have the opportunity to try to get him into the development lab to see if we can get him a little stronger and healthier. So I don't know if the overbid on both of these guys is going to work out, but I'm going to get greedy and try to bring two big-time players on board. We're going to make an offer to Albrighton. Says he's looking for $3 million. We're going to do better than that. $3,750,000. See if we can perhaps convince him to just sign with us early. And then Montez, looking for $1.7 million. We've got $1.95 million left. We're going to make that offer to him right up front as well. And go big or go home. And we're trying to go big here in international amateur free agency in 2026. We've simmed ahead a few days. Both Albrighton and Montez claim that they favor our offers, but I've heard that before from these young prospects. Like many of us, they're really just chasing the dollar when all is said and done. And that was quick, and that was sweet. And both Albrighton and Montez have inked the contracts with us. So appreciate those of you who put some thought into this. There is a part of me that's still a little torn. I really liked the shortstop as well, but as I said, I'm paying all of you such big bucks to be my resources in scouting around the world that when most of the team liked Albrighton the most, I felt like that was a direction to go. But the fact that we got Albrighton on board, in addition to Jorge Montez with those early overbids, makes me feel real good about the way we're going to have spent our $5.7 million this IAFA period. Can't complain about it. I wasn't really expecting it to go that well. I thought that we would end up probably having to spend the full $5.7 million on one of them. But I have definitely found, and I know some of you have also found similarly in this OOTP 25 latest version of the game, that if you do what we just did and you're a little aggressive right up front, sometimes you can land these players real early. And these IAFA classes are very deep and very strong, so there's a lot of options. The other teams are still going to get some pretty good prospects, but I find it hard to believe that anyone's going to feel better coming out of this IAFA period than we do with Montez and Albrighton now part of our organization. And we did get the scouting report back on Tyler Stevenson. Kind of looks like we thought he did. He's been an above-average offensive player over the course of his career. Now, unfortunately, the first 3 seasons of his career are the ones where he was clearly above average. 2 of the last 3 seasons, he's clearly been below average offensively, so he's not necessarily trending in the best direction. I was hoping maybe he'd be looking for a minor league contract with major league options, but we can't get that lucky. I'm still a little torn on what to do. Reese McGuire's still out there. I do think that McGuire's bat as a left-handed hitter against right-handed pitching, combined with what potentially the right-handed hitting Langeliers could do against left-handed pitching, wouldn't be a horrible combination at catcher. It wouldn't necessarily be a good combination either, but it's hard to imagine we're going to get less production out of the position with McGuire in the mix than we did this past year with Banfield in the mix with Langeliers. And then McGuire would also give us that captain personality that we've been searching for this offseason. We have brought players on board who can fill that role for us to minor league contracts in AAA, and then most notably potentially at the major league level. And I guess he's not even on the major league team yet, but bringing back Brian Buelvis, who could be in the mix to be a 4th or 5th outfielder for us. So we don't have to bring on McGuire to fill that captain role, since we do have Buelvis penciled in right now as a 4th or 5th outfielder. But if we did bring McGuire on, that would mean we could really make the right decision as far as baseball skills for that 4th or 5th outfield spots, rather than maybe shoehorning Buelvis in simply because of his personality. So if you've got thoughts on McGuire versus Stevenson versus maybe someone else on this list, although I'm not signing Gary Sanchez, would love to hear those in the comments to this episode. If you've got any more thoughts on what we should do with Miller, maybe I underestimated one of those trades, but I didn't really feel like any of them were great trades for us, given that if Miller comes back as the player he has been, I think he's by far better than any of those other guys. Now, those other guys are younger. Miller's probably eventually going to price himself out of Oakland. But if Miller comes back healthy and productive, I think we'll still have the opportunity to pick up something useful for him in a trade over the next 18 to 24 months. So there's still a lot to think about. I promise you next episode we'll move further ahead in terms of days. But the feedback that a lot of you shared with me was just so interesting and so useful that I wanted to kind of do a deep dive on the things that you were opining on and I've been thinking about. And thank you again for all of the help. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.